Good morning. What if I told you that the secret to being more creative is exactly the opposite of what you think? Would you believe me? Well, let's find out. I'm Eric Eisenstein, the Avian Rebbe, and I teach Jewish wisdom seen in the beauty of birds. And this morning, what we're going to do is take a look at a very interesting place. It's called Choke Canyon State Park. It's deep down in the brush country of South Texas, and it is a very confined, challenging place. Particularly this morning, there was a huge amount of fog, almost impenetrable, and always there's a huge amount of brush, definitely impenetrable. And those impenetrable things, the fog and the brush, got me thinking about how we be creative. That's what we're going to talk about today. So stick around, take a look at some of the birds, listen to some of the lessons, and make sure to stay until the end of the video when I offer 2 action suggestions that you can use to take the lessons from out here and put them into your daily life. I promise it'll be a worthwhile endeavor. Ready? Out to the trails. For thousands of years, artists have been inspired by birds. Maybe it's the colors, or the shape, or the sizes, or the motion, or the song. It could be any number of things. But there is something beautiful about a bird that naturally leads to an artist saying, there's something special there. In the popular imagination, exemplified by the phrase, free as a bird, we look at birds and we think, they can do whatever they want. They're unconstrained. They are free in a way that, again, is inspirational. But I would suggest that there's actually more to it than that. Look a little more closely. Look at the way that a bird is actually made, and you get a very different sense of the constraints under which they operate. So, for example, look at a coot. Look at the way that the feathers are tightly interlaced. You can't see it, but they generally have oil that they preen and put on their feathers to cause them to be even more waterproof. They have toes that are lobed, allow them to move through the water or mucky areas on the shore in a way that simply isn't possible for other kinds of animals. In other words, birds are an absolutely spectacular adaptation to the constraints under which they live. Look at a hawk. Look at the way that their face, their beak, their ear, their eyes, all are aerodynamic. Look at the way that their feet are tucked up underneath their body to enhance the speed and agility that they have in moving through the air. Again, it's all a question of responding to these constraints. They are perfectly suited for moving through their environment, for operating in ways that the rest of us may have trouble even understanding. But the reality is that there are physical limitations, the same kind of limitations that artists have. Think of the difference between a watercolor and an oil painting. We all know that those different media have different capabilities, empower an artist to work in different ways. Think about the collage artist. They're taking different elements and putting them together in different ways precisely because each of those elements has different capabilities or different characteristics that add to the overall artistic sense that the artist wants to generate. In other words, art, real art, is not about being limitless or unbounded, but rather on the contrary, it's precisely the boundaries of the medium or the form or the type of expression within which the artist operates that demonstrates mastery, that demonstrates the ability to execute within the confines of a craft. That's what it means to be artistic. Well, what do you think so far? Pretty wild, huh? Definitely stick around until the end because that's when you'll see the 2 action suggestions. In the meantime, if you're enjoying the video, please hit the little subscribe button down below and we'll talk more later. Okay? Back to the trails. There is a Torah portion called Terumah. That, I dare say, would not make it to most people's top 10 lists of most fascinating Torah portions. I get it. And yet, in looking at this Torah portion, we see something that is very similar to the lesson that we learned from the birds. And what is that? Let me step back for a second. Terumah is essentially a set of blueprints. Here, in minute detail, are all of the different measurements and materials and types of construction that are going to go into the creation of the tabernacle, the place that will be the tent of meeting between the people and God as the Israelites journey through the desert. So, in this excruciating level of detail, you might be forgiven if you thought, well, I guess there's not a whole lot of room for creativity. Everything is spelled out. And the question, of course, is, why is it this way? Because think for a moment, there are other aspects of Jewish practice, even back in Torah times, that don't get nearly that level of detail. How is a kosher animal to be slaughtered? Very little detail. How are property rights to be resolved? Very little detail. How are the holidays supposed to be celebrated? Very little detail. And yet here, with this entire portion, we get nothing but detail. And why is that? I would suggest that at least one possible answer is precisely this question of creativity and craft. That what we're supposed to learn is that even in this most important of construction projects, effectively the house of God, the fact that everything is laid out in minute detail is not intended to say that there is no mastery or no craft, that everything is simply to be prescribed in such a level of detail that there's no room for human interaction, human expression. In fact, exactly the contrary. The craftsmen who go and build the tabernacle are given this set of constraints precisely as a jumping off point for exhibiting the love and the care and the craftsmanship that imbue this building with the love of their hearts. That's the wisdom that they bring to the construction. That's the special secret sauce, if you will, that takes a simple set of blueprints and turns it into the outline of an incredible artistic expression. The very same way that we look at birds and realize that they're capable of astonishing us with the creative ways that they operate in the world, so too do these constraints with which we are presented in the Torah portion remind us that the constraint, whether of a poem or of a bird or of a building, are exactly the parameters that allow us to demonstrate our own mastery and our own craft. Well, that's my lesson for today. And now it's up to you. Here are the 2 action suggestions that I'd like you to try, just try, and see if it doesn't help make you more creative in every facet of your life. Ready? Action suggestion number 1. Time to write a poem. Grab a pen, grab a paper, and when I say write a poem, what I really mean is write a poem that is constrained, okay? So it could be a haiku, it could be a limerick, it could be a sonnet, any of the very defined, constrained poetic forms. And I'll have links to all of them down in the description. Write the first one. I bet it's hard, and frankly, I bet it's not very good. Do it again. Do it a third time. Third time. Do it over the space of a few days. And I bet what you're going to find is 2 things. Number 1, you get a lot better. And number two, it's a whole lot easier. The more we practice operating within these constraints, the better we get at it and the better the output that we generate. Action suggestion number two. Take the same approach, but apply it to something that isn't a poem. In other words, take a project at work. I'm guessing you have something that's somewhat open-ended or perhaps a little bit amorphous. Now let's try to make it harder. Harder. Put some constraints around it. If you've got a timeline of 3 months, make it 2 months. If you've got a budget of X, knock it down by 20%. See what adding these constraints can do for your creativity. My guess is you're going to find that the more constraints that you impose and the more seemingly impossible the whole thing is, the more it forces you to become creative, to spur your imagination in operating in ways that you hadn't considered before. That's what creativity is all about. That's what we've learned today. And I hope that you'll be able to take those lessons from out here and bring them inside. That's the whole point. Okay? Good. I'd love to know how it goes for you. I imagine there are going to be some really interesting stories. Feel free to share them in the comments down below. And of course, be certain to subscribe because there's a lot more of these interrupted walks coming in the future. In the meantime, be grounded, fly high.